Okay, colleagues and comrades, can I extend a very, very warm comradely welcome to everybody who's chosen to tune into the Branch Resources Review, Insufficient and Incomplete. Branches deserve better. This has been staged by a large group of activists who go under the banner Time for Change in our union, Time for Change, particularly in the upcoming NEC elections. So you are all very welcome. My name is Glenn Williams. I'll introduce myself in a minute. Just in terms of some housekeeping, we've already thankfully been sent a long list of questions. You'll notice that you've been automatically muted, and we would ask that that remains, that you remain muted throughout the meeting. Just to let you know, there was some Canadian/American woman telling you this meeting is being recorded. So we've been sent a lot of questions. However, if there's a burning question that you wish to ask, then if you can exercise the chat facility, but send it to me, Glenn Williams, as chair. And hopefully, if there are questions, we'll either blend them into the questions you've already been sent, or we'll take them individually. You don't have to, I won't be identifying people by name. So this is your opportunity to ask probing and relevant questions. So you're all very welcome indeed. So the plan will be that I'll introduce myself. My name is Glenn Williams. There are a number of speakers. They are all speaking in a personal capacity. And before each set of slides, they will introduce themselves. My name is Glenn Williams. Wear a number of hats within UNISON. I'm a branch secretary. I'm a regional convener, and I'm chair of the local government service group here in a personal capacity. So, like I said, the purpose of this event really is it's our opportunity to present some of the information we believe it's highly unlikely you will be provided with anywhere else. Some of you on the meeting may already have had once or twice the headquarters machines presentation, and this is our opportunity to provide you with some alternative views on some of the data you've been presented with. It's for us to explain why the Branch Resources Review, which is going to Special Delegates Conference, is so important. It's to explain, if you know nothing about the Branch Resources Review, some of the fundamentals. And it's also to dispel some of the myths that we believe exist around the messages that are being sent out. So between us, this is going to bounce along. The presentations, hopefully, if I keep the speakers to task, will be around about 35 minutes, enabling 25 minutes for questions to be resolved. However, if questions aren't answered by the end, the very last slide that you will see will be an email and various social media contacts to which you can send your questions if they've not been answered, and you will receive an answer. So that's enough of me. I'm going to plow on now, and I'm going to ask our first presenter, who is Steve, to both introduce himself and word of warning, Steve, you're on. The red light will appear when you go over your speaking time. So welcome, Steve. Introduce yourself. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm Steve North. I am, like Glenn, a branch secretary in the North West. I also sit on the NEC as one of the North West representatives, currently standing for re-election. And I was one of the NEC representatives on the Branch Resource Review Group. I actually led for a considerable period of time as the lay lead on Workstream A, which was tasked with branch engagement. I am speaking in a personal capacity this evening. And I'm going to talk to you why we believe that the Branch Resource Review has not completed. So a first point, and this is really important, nearly 60% of the union's expenditure goes on staffing. Now, when motion 126, which was the motion which launched the Branch Resource Review, was passed 2 years ago, we were told that all the resources of the union would be looked at in order to provide a settlement for branches. Yet the nearly 60% that goes on staffing has not yet been reviewed. We were told it would be reviewed right at the start, but that hasn't yet taken place. So the first thing we want you to bear in mind is that the information that's being presented to you, the proposals presented to you, are as a result of not having looked at the majority of the union's expenditure. Now, just to be clear, this is not us saying that we believe there should be major staff cuts. This is us saying that in order to do this properly, we need to consider whether current staffing resources are directed in the right place. And without a review, we can't confidently say that. So that needs to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. The second point you can see on the slide there is that the results of the branch engagement undertaken by the workstream I led on are not fully reflected in the proposals. So just to say to you that you'll hear a lot about 3 priorities being identified by branches in the survey we undertook, which had a really good response rate. And you'll be told that time was identified as the most important thing people needed more of, followed by regional support and then branch resources. Now, technically, that is the correct order. However, there are some exceptions to that, and I don't think it's appropriate to consider that it's a simple 1, 2, 3 in that order. So, for example, 3 of the regions, Northern Ireland, the South East, and Yorkshire and Humberside, all said that they would prefer additional branch funding over regional support. The largest service group, the local government service group, also said that its branches would prefer additional funding over regional support. And specific equipment and specific software systems, these were offered as options that branches could have chosen to choose in that survey, and they both finished below branch funding. Yet they are presented quite heavily in the proposals, whereas we will argue tonight that the branch funding aspect is not properly resourced. The third point here, no collaboration, sharing of ideas or data in workstream D. Well, this is something that Dan Sartin will speak more on shortly, but I'm sure when you listen to the information that Dan will put forward, you will see that actually some of the views that we've now been presented with were fixed from the outset. And the final point we would argue is that we have an acceptable interim position that conference agreed only 2 years ago when motion 126 was passed, and that provided the 5% uplifts to branches. So we believe that we have a situation whereby branches have an acceptable interim level of funding, that the branch resource review has not completed its work for the reasons I've set out, and therefore for the NEC to bring proposals to conference at this stage without having undertaken that work is not something that should inform branch funding formulas or regional support and organising funds going forward for the foreseeable future. Dan, do you want to move on the slides? So yeah, essentially the point I've just made. Adopting a settled position for up to 5 years on a basis of a review that's not completed or look at the whole of the union does not seem at all sensible to us. And then just to say that COVID-19 underspends at a national level. So we're going to make we predict a 5.1 million surplus from 2020. Well, we don't predict it. That is what's been achieved in 2020. And we've seen other surpluses as well in recent years. So when you actually compare the figure of the 5.1 million in 2020 alone to what's being given to branches in these proposals, you can see that the union is not really being as ambitious as it possibly could be if the job was done properly. And then the final point I want to make is that the UNISON staff pension scheme situation, which anyone who's a branch secretary or a branch treasurer in this meeting will understand, is a huge piece of work with potentially far-reaching implications. Well, that's not proceeded at an acceptable pace. But we do know that the notional UNISON staff pension deficit has increased to £264 million. So we would again argue that this needs to be got to grips with in the proper way, as well as the staffing review that needs to take place before we are presented with proposals that are fit for purpose going forward. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, my name's Dan Sartin. I'm the branch secretary of West Sussex branch, which is a large county branch, 6,000 full members and 420 employers, and a poor employer facility time. Now, my branch has been involved in the branch finances debate for a number of years. We were co-drafters of the motion 126 motion in 2019, which brought about the top-ups. And I'm the NEC member for the South East, seeking re-election at the moment. I'm one of 3 members on the BRR working group, along with Glenn and along with Steve, who do want to see a much more ambitious plan for our union than what we're being offered. And I was on the subgroup on the branch funding formula, which is why I'm going to be doing these slides today. So what we can see, first of all, is that the branch funding formula, this is the resources we control as branches under our democratic control. That is only proposed to increase by 0.5%. And that really tells you a lot about what you need to know about the branch resources review. 0.5% is not a lot. It equates to about £850,000. Now, that is the increase in the share that branches will receive of all the subscription income the union generates. Now, there are 829 branches in UNISON, so you don't need to be brilliant at maths to work out that on average, that's about £1,000 a branch. That money won't be divvied up like that in an average way, but it helps you understand the scale of what's being offered, £1,000 per branch. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, and it isn't. What are you going to do with that? Who are you going to employ with that as a branch? What are you going to deliver in terms of the organising agenda? It seems to me that you're only going to be buying a few more pens when you're talking about money of that scale. And don't forget, this is a review that's been 10 years in the making. It was supposed to address the fundamental shifts in where the work is now done in our union. And we would argue that it hasn't done that. And as Steve was saying, we do have an interim position, and this is not an improvement on that position. It's barely noticeable. We also, I'll explain later, see changes to the reserves factor that will decrease from £16 per member before that has implications for branches. This is all quite worrying. And it doesn't address what UNISON could be, what it should be as a union, what we could achieve with the organising agenda. So it does essentially recycle reserves from branches that have them to those that don't. And that's fine as a principle. I don't object to that. I think that's a good thing. We want resources and funding to be used for members' benefit, but it's not enough on its own, and it's simply not going to change our union. Now, this slide is from the national presentation. You might recognize it, although I have enhanced it with the National Lottery sign, because what this slide tries to tell you from the National Union is that all of a sudden branches might be able to qualify for up to 42.5% funding. Now, I'm going to explain in a moment why that's simply not going to be the case. It's completely illusory. So it's not going to be your branch. It won't be you that gets 42.5%. It really won't be. And even if it did, we must go back to the earlier point. We're talking about £850,000 going up in the funding share. So even if you did get to 42.5, the sums behind this are not significant. And I think I'm worried that branches are being promised more than the branch resources review will deliver. There are three things on this slide we need to be clear about. The multi-employer factor, where it says you can go up to 5.5%, the low reserves entitlement of up to 7%, and the general fund regulator at £12 per member. So I'm going to try and explain those a little bit more now. So the first one is the multi-employer factor. You could theoretically get up to 5.5% extra funding for that. But to get there, you've got to have more than 400 employers with 3 members or more. Now, I don't know. I don't think there are going to be many branches that qualify for that. I asked to see the data on this, and I didn't receive it. So that there isn't the transparency on that. But I'm going to use my branch as an example, because we're a big branch. But if I give you that as an example, you can benchmark your branch where you sit. Are you smaller than us? Are you bigger? We've got 6,000 members, 423 employers. But the first critical thing is 242 of our employers, we only have 1 or 2 members in. So that's 57% of our branch's employers don't even qualify for this chart. So that leaves 181 employers with 3 members or more. So you can see from that, we would get an extra 3%. We'd fall into that bracket. But what you need to remember is that we were always, even under the old 2001 scheme, getting a maximum of 2% on this chart. And under the previous scheme, the 2019 scheme we passed with the top-ups, that increased. We got a little bit extra, and our branch got to 2.5% under this factor. So what that tells us is this big change we're being told about, for a branch like ours with 420 employers, that's worth 0.5%. And in cash terms for my branch, that's about £3,000. Now, for you watching this, your branch will be different, but you should be able to get a sense of what this will be worth. Again, what am I going to do with £3,000? I'm not going to be able to make a significant change to our members. Now, the next slide is on the reserves. This was, again, an area where you'd think, oh, good, I can potentially get up to 7% extra funding entitlement for my members. Again, I think in practice, very few branches are going to be getting near 7%. You would need to have reserves as low as £3.60 per member. That really is perilously low. And if you've got reserves that low, then you probably should be talking to your RO. But that for me means that, not only are few branches going to get there, you've then got to start to think, well, actually, this is the only way through the new funding formula I can generate as a branch secretary and a branch treasurer more money for more income to support my members. So how about if I budget for that? I could budget to spend money to get my reserves down to those levels. Well, firstly, you would have to ask yourself, is that really desirable? It's not easy to budget like that, and it's certainly not necessarily desirable. Reserves are there for a reason, which is to protect branches from fluctuations and variations and unforeseen costs. But even if you could budget that way, would you want to employ additional branch staff on that basis? No national staff are employed on that kind of budgetary basis. So why would branches have to budget to be spending their reserves in that way to employ staff? And then finally, and this is critical, would you even be allowed to if you wanted to? Because the rules around this have not been published. It's been specifically said that we're not going to publish the rules, the governance for this until after special conference. So you may well find that the rules of the game change anyway, and you simply can't budget to benefit from this reserves additional entitlement. So this looks highly unlikely to be a really good sound basis for branches to receive more funding. The final slide, and this is to remember that even if you gain with some of those factors, with the multi-employer factor, with the additional 1% on the base funding, with what you get with one hand can be taken away with the other. Now, at the moment, branches can have up to £16 per member in reserves before they start to lose their additional entitlements. Now, that's dropping to £12. £12 is a lot lower, obviously, and as soon as you've got more than £12, so £12 and a penny, you will start to lose your additional entitlements. Now, many branches have increased their reserves because of COVID. We've not been spending, my branch like yours, we've not been spending it on going to conferences, etc. So actually reserves are going up in branches at the moment. Ours went up from £8 per member to about £13 per member. So even with our modest reserves that are at £13 per member, I would argue modest and quite legitimate, we would start to lose any additional monies through this regulator. So I think in sum, and I will finish now, this is actually, I'm afraid, worth peanuts. And if you're thinking that this is the solution to your branch's problems, then I'm afraid through the branch funding formula, it isn't. If your employer reviewed your pay for 10 years and came back with an offer of 0.5%, you would really say, no thanks, go back and do better. And that's what we are saying to the NEC, and that's what we want to see happen at conference. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Dan. So my name's Glenn Williams. I will present the next slide, and the reason it's me that's been asked to do this is regional convener speaking in a personal capacity for the North West region. I was asked to represent the issues brought about by Workstream B, which was the Branch Support and Organising Fund, originally called, interestingly, the Regional Support and Organising Fund. But just by way of context, I want to make absolutely clear from the outset that I come from a region who has always used its regional pool to its full extent, who have always applied massively to what was the fighting fund. And I would hazard a guess of the 12 regions, my region, the Northwest region, has probably expended more money from the regional pool and the fighting fund than any other. So my region very much comes to the concept and the principle of a branch support and organising fund very positively, very supporting. And it's based on collaborative working with regional elected staff and regional selected staff. So we have a partnership arrangement. Now, I don't want to demean other regions, but I would hazard a guess maybe that relationship and partnership working does not exist everywhere else across our union. What's clear is that the regional pool hasn't always been used by all regions. What's also clear is that the Fighting Fund wasn't applied to its maximum from all other regions. So what the Branch Support and Organising Fund does is it deletes the Fighting Fund monies and it deletes what came under the terminology of the regional pool. It deletes those. So when the slide talks about an additional 1.5, which is £2.5 million, you might think, my goodness, given what Dan's just told us, this is going to be the panacea of all ills for every branch, because we're going to have a massive pool. Because if you add to that the 0.5% that existed as part of the regional pool, then we're actually talking about a potentially not new money, but 2%, which is around about £3.2 million. So having said that we fully support the principle and concept of a branch support and organising fund, my view is this is not what it's being presented as, the panacea for all branch issues, but far from it. The additional 1.5% on top of the 0.5% equates to 3.2 million, as I said. So Dan gave details of his branch. When I first started many years ago, we had one employer. We now have 234 spread across 415 workplaces. And I would love to be able to say to you, even in a region that embraces organising and has done some fantastic work in terms of recognition, in terms of campaigning, I would love to say that that additional money will resolve all the issues that I face at a branch level as a branch secretary. But that will work out across the union, 3.2 million. You can do the maths. Next slide, please, Dan. You can do the maths yourself. Because what's the actual real value of the branch support and organising fund? Well, 3.2 million, if we've got 1.3 million members, you can do it yourself. It's £2.50 per member. That will just about buy the pen per member that Dan referred to. It's around about £3,500 per branch. Now, that's not guaranteed money. It will be £3.2 million right across the 12 regions. That equates to around about £250,000. Again, stood on its own, that may sound a lot of money. But when you stand it against what's been declared as the pension liability for employed staff of £264 million, I'm hoping that you begin to see, given that this isn't new money, it feels like what they're doing is, having ignored the 60% that Steve North referred to, what they're doing is shuffling the pack of the branch reserves table and offering us that and calling it new money. And by the way, the reason I said this isn't guaranteed is that you have to bid for this money. Yeah, it's project based. And the single myth, if nothing else, I do want to dispel is this idea that this will enable branches to employ permanent staff. It won't. Quite rightly, it will stop the rogue practice of employing people on temporary contracts as Fighting Fund organisers. It will hopefully provide permanent employment for those who don't want to take the skills and go elsewhere. However, it will not enable branches to employ permanent staff to address permanent solutions around the fragmentation that we see every day. So just to be really clear, in that work stream, I felt and argued right from the start, this is not enough. And what we levied in the initial start of that work stream is it should be at least 10%. That was then moved to 4% and then down to 2%. In our region, there are two unions who are rolled out as the examples of good practice, the SEIU in America and SITRU in Ireland, and they are rolled out as the major players in organising. Those two unions give 25% of their income to organising. Well, if it's good enough for those, we're the biggest and we're supposed to be seriously committed to organising. That's the aspiration we should have. So it's insufficient. It's also unclear. And the second picture there refers to it's unfinished, but it's also unclear. Now, in our region, we have fairly clear guidance in terms of how we manage the regional pool, how we would manage Fighting Fund organising. That is not the case across the union. We still haven't got the guidelines telling you how you'd make a bid. We still haven't got the guidelines in terms of how they'd be managed. We haven't got the guide. You can read them for yourself, the guidelines that are missing. So there's a lot of unanswered questions around how the scheme will be managed. I would love to be able to say it'll be managed democratically and transparently as it is in our region, but as it stands, I can't guarantee that. So it remains unclear. Next slide, please, Dan. And we do have a vision for what we want. We have a very clear vision based on the fact that we believe it's incomplete. We've waited 10 years for this, so this is the time, and this will be a generational change. And what we want is a real commitment, like the SEIU, like SIP2, like other unions who commit to 20 and 25%. We want an organising union that's properly funded. It's not a Del Boy equivalent, it's a Rolls Royce. It's what branches are crying out for, which is permanent solutions to long-running branch issues. The decision that's taken at a Special Delegates Conference will be in place for many years. So I think it's no secret this meeting wants to say it should be deferred, it should be delayed until it's been completed, not just around the 60% that hasn't been touched. But my view and the view of those who voted against this is that it's insufficient and unclear and incomplete. Thanks very much. So I'll now like to introduce the fourth presenter, who will introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Jane Wilcox. I'm standing as one of the Northwest female seats as a Time for Real Change candidate in the NEC elections. I'm an assistant branch secretary and the treasurer of Manchester branch, and our branch was involved in motion 126 that was passed at the conference in Liverpool in 2019, and I spoke in favour of it and said that nothing would happen unless conference mandated it and voted for it. I don't think I'll get to speak at this upcoming conference. You've probably noticed that the branch resources review comes with a promise of some improvements in the services that branches receive from the national office. Well, that instantly made me suspicious of the proposals, because trying to distract attention from a poor quality product by giving away extras with it is an old and tired marketing trick, and there is a name for it in the trade. I'd like to apologise to all you of a delicate disposition, and we can dispense with that slide now, thanks, Dan. I have to say that on examination of the sequence enhancing this deal, my suspicion has turned to anger. These are the most basic services that the central function of a union like ours should provide for us in branches, especially a central office that absorbs the lion's share of our members' subs. These are the tools that branches need to do our work, and that are impractical for us to provide for ourselves, and we should be provided with them as a matter of course. I mean to say, I fail to see how putting documents like the rule book that are already available on the union's website on a different platform is an improvement, or updating things like the code of practice that have to be updated as a matter of course constitutes an extra. For the next slide, please, Dan. When you really think about it, this doesn't look so much like a package to sweeten a poor offer as a threat to withhold the support that branches need unless we agree to this inadequate funding formula. And you really need to think about this at the Special Delegates Conference, because if we tolerate that, it will set a very dangerous precedent. But no matter whether this is a clumsy attempt at bribery or a clumsy attempt at blackmail, for me, it's a big red flag, and it should be for you. And finally, to paraphrase the words spoken at the 2018 conference in Brighton by a wise woman, a neighbour of ours in Manchester, trust your gut, and if it doesn't feel right, don't vote for it. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Jane. I'll now hand over to Maggie, who will introduce herself.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm Maggie Mcguire. I'm speaking in a personal capacity along with the others, and I'm a Time for Real Change candidate standing for the first time in a Scottish female seat on the NEC. I have been an activist for more years than I would care to admit to, and I'm currently the treasurer of our branch. If elected, I am committed to bringing real change to UNISON, starting with the branch resources review. So what do we stand for on branch resources? Well, the first thing is the priority is to get it right. This is an absolute fundamental change that they want to implement. It can't and it shouldn't be rushed. we run the risk of implementing an unworkable solution. The review is far from complete, despite what you have been reported to date. Number 2, the branch funding formula and the branch support and organising fund. We can't at this stage conclude that the formula for funding and the branch support and organising fund will be fit for purpose. Why was 60% of the overall annual income not reviewed? We were promised a full review, not a half-hearted one that does not meet our branch's needs. The funding formula has to be more ambitious and have serious solutions to be fit for our branches. None of the key points of the proposal are clear. Guidelines are still to be written and approved. Are we going to let this happen? We wouldn't let our employer make such fundamental changes without clear principles in place. Why are we allowing those who should be supporting us to do it? The incoming NEC should be allowed to continue and complete the branch resources review and report back to National Delegate Conference 2022 with appropriate and workable solutions. We need to remember that there is no rush. There is an acceptable and workable interim position introduced by Motion 126 at the National Delegate Conference in 2019. Why bring a motion of this magnitude to the most undemocratic conference UNISON has ever held? Why does the NEC want to push this through now? What are they really afraid of? This motion is not going to be debated democratically. Branches will not be able to have their say, and that is simply not on. The review, as said before, has been in the making for 10 years. But only in the last 2 years has any work actually been undertaken on it, and the pandemic has had a detrimental effect on it too. It's really not finished, not by a long shot. We deserve a trade union that will provide the support our branches and members expect and deserve. We are not a glorified insurance company. If you vote for the motion, you can kiss goodbye to an organising agenda and you will get the status quo or even worse. Vote against the motion, you will get collective and less individual. Vote against the motion, you will get more organising and less servicing. Democracy is a key to our union. Vote for the motion, lose your democracy. What is the absolute worst that could happen? Oh yeah, motion 126 continues. Branches are happy with the formula. We should let it continue until the review concludes and we have the opportunity to debate it at a democratic conference, which is our absolute right. Please remember, this motion is one of the most important motions that you as delegates will vote on. It will be integral to how branches will operate in the future. We must make the right decision to ensure branches are appropriately supported. Branches are our union, and without branches, there is no UNISON. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And now the last 2 slides, I'll ask Steve North to come back in. Thanks, Steve.
So the first thing we want people to know here is that we've not wanted to go to conference with a binary choice between supporting or opposing this motion from the NEC. We've tried to improve this position. We've put motions forward to try and take some of the bits of this that Jane's described that should be business as usual anyway, whilst asking the NEC to finish the job, and those motions have been ruled out of order. So what we've then done is tried to put amendments forward to try and amend the NEC motion so that, again, the parts that should be happening anyway are retained, but there is a request to finish the job. And those amendments have been ruled out of order. We appealed the ruling out of order of the motion. That was unsuccessful. We're now appealing the ruling out of order of the amendments, and let's see how we get on. But if our attempts to improve the NEC motion aren't successful, then we must reject the NEC's motion for the reasons that you've been given. They need to be made to finish the job properly. Next slide.
Thanks very much indeed to all the speakers, both for your discipline and your content. So for those who may have missed the beginning, we've been sent a series of questions. There is facility to put some questions in the chat, but bear in mind we've already had 20 submitted and the intention is to finish at 7:30. I can confirm to the person who asked around the provision sharing of the slides that will be done. That's not a problem. So those slides we're quite happy for all those to be transparent. So without further ado, And just so the panel members are aware, I'll probably try and indicate who I'm going to ask to answer the question. So we've had a question sent in from Jim from the Southwest. And Jim has heard that one amendment to motion 72, that's the NEC motion on the branch funding formula. I've heard that one amendment to motion 72 is now being looked on favourably by Standing Orders Committee. It's something about a 3 years transitional protection. Can you tell me any more? I'll ask Steve to comment on that. Steve?
There we go. Just some problems unmuting. Yeah, that's a very good question actually, and there is truth in that. The NEC only today actually has agreed to take forward an amendment effectively to do that, to put transitional protection in place for any branches who lose out as a result of this motion, of this motion passing. Now, the first thing you've got to ask yourself is, when does transitional protection normally get put in place? Well, it's normally when you lose something. So the example being, you know, if somebody's going to lose pay in a workplace, there might be a period of pay protection. So the fact that the NEC feels it necessary to put in transitional protection around this motion, to me, is a significant concern. And that's, I think, a real red flag as to why we should be really concerned, especially that we've not been given the data about which branches will gain and which branches will lose. That is a big concern that we should all have, and a further reason to oppose the thing in its entirety.
Thanks very much, Steve. I do find it odd that all of a sudden a substantial figure of money has been found, because apparently we've been waiting for 10 years for the branch funding formula and the review to take place, and within 10 days we found millions of pounds, and yet we've been told on the work streams that we can't dip into general reserves. So you make your own mind up as to why that protection has suddenly been found. So the next question is from Mike from West Midlands. I was told by my regional organiser our branch would get a huge sum under the branch resources review on the 1st of January 2022. Indeed, an extra £48,000. However, when I queried the figures, I was told that head office had lost the workings. I pushed for an answer, and eventually my regional organiser confirmed we get an extra £1,000. This is for you, Dan. So the question that Mike has asked is, so what's going on, Dan?
Okay, thanks. That's I have heard this from a few branches actually. I heard it from another branch in the Southwest. It's not happening universally around the country. We've not seen it in the Southeast, to the best of my knowledge, but some branches are being told this is the money you're going to get from the new motion 72 funding formula, and someone's made a mistake. They've you know, this is part of a really significant charm offensive. Huge amounts of resources going into persuading people to vote for this motion, but in doing this, someone's made a mistake and given branches wrong data, and no one will actually know whether they've got the wrong data unless they challenge it and ask. Now, in the case of this branch secretary, they just instinctively knew that £48,000 couldn't be right, and boy, they're not wrong, because that is a huge amount of money, and it's, you know, it's simply preposterous. And when they were challenged, it's come back as £1,000, and I think even the branch treasurer there is questioning that. So I do think it's worth underscoring that be very skeptical if you're told your branch is going to hit the jackpot, because the jackpot doesn't exist. We've looked at this, we've lived and breathed this for a long time. We know roughly, you know, we're not saying we're infallible, but we've got a pretty good idea what's going on with the new formula, what it's going to be worth in certain circumstances. It's not going to be worth 48 grand. So if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And we should be questioning why our union's got itself in a position where it's giving out duff information to people ahead of a critical vote. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks very much, Dan. The next question is from Ahmed from West Midlands, and it regards what I referenced before around the staff pension scheme deficit. It's standing at £264 million. The question is, and I'll put this to you, Jane, is the staff pension scheme deficit driving the National Union's approach to branch resources? Jane?
Well, all I'd like to say to that is you might think that we couldn't possibly comment.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Okay, Michelle from the Southeast, it's a question around the management of Special Delegates Conference. The question is, are you concerned that the bureaucracy may try underhand tactics to get this passed at the Special Delegates Conference? If so, what should we look out for? And are there any ideas as to how to tackle this? So it would be easy for me to make the same response as Jane has just done. I'd be quite happy to do that. I'm not sure if Michelle has got any experience of not just virtual meetings, but UNISON virtually held meetings. They are difficult to say the least. If you've been on any committee or any decision-making platforms, UNISON and abroad, you will know yourself how difficult this is. So it seems odd to me that probably the largest decision-making forum that this union is ever going to hold virtually has been decided that, and it's the first ever time in history, that we're going to take one of the biggest financial decisions in the history of the union at probably the most difficult to manage conference. That seems odd to me. I can tell you, and I'm not suggesting these are underhand tactics at all, but I can tell you that one of the implications of holding any meeting virtually on such a large scale is that if you want to speak on any motion, you have to register your name. There's probably only going to be about a week's window for you to register your name. You have to identify yourself, your branch or the constituency you're speaking on, and whether you want to speak for or against a particular motion. Potentially you will then held in a waiting room with other speakers. There is a potential you will not be able to hear the rest of the debate. It's still to be clarified. And that in itself is worrying. We're a couple of weeks away 3 weeks away, I think, from Special Delegates Conference. And the guidance on how the conference will be managed has still not been shared. It's still not been clarified. So in terms of any tactics, I think we need to be really careful. What we have been told is that there won't be any emergency motions, that standing orders remit will be minimised, but there will be the facility to have what's called a question be put. So my advice is if you want to speak, you register early, you make sure that you're able to do that, and watch out for whoever moves that the question be put. My concern is that there may be some moves to query the quorum or the fair proportionality of the standing delegates, which could be called into question. I'm not suggesting they're underhand tactics, they're all within rule, but that would be my response to that question from Michelle. So the next question is from Susan from Eastern Region. Maggie, I'll come to you for this. It says, too many branches have far too much money sitting idly in reserves for a rainy day. Why would we oppose changing this? So Maggie, you okay?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Time for Real Change candidates are opposed to having high reserves individually, but we are absolutely not opposed to redistributing them. It's merely crumbs from the table at this moment in time that they're given with. Equity across the union is what is needed. We were promised a no stone unturned review, yet all they did was shuffle around the 40% of the overall income, leaving the lion's share untouched. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Maggie. The next two are from different people from the Northwest. I'll go to Steve for the first one, from John. If we have to cut back somewhere else to put money into retention, what would be cut from the national regional setup, or would staff be transferred? You okay with that, Steve?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this goes to the point that I made before, that if there was requirements to cut from the national and regional budgets in order to support branch retention, then we wouldn't be looking for people to be losing their jobs elsewhere. This is about redirecting people towards support that can be provided and that branches actually want and that members actually want. And that's what you do with a staffing review. You don't go in with a prefixed idea of what the outcome is. You go in and say, right, let's look at what people are doing currently, and let's see whether what people are currently doing is in line with our vision to be an organising campaigning union. And that's what we want to see happen. So we've got no preconceived ideas on what the outcome would be. We just want to make sure that the job is complete. And we firmly believe that, based on, Glenn's given a couple of examples from other unions there, SIT2 and brothers and sisters over in Ireland as well, that that's SIT2 and SEIU in the US, they're able to dedicate 25% of their expenditure towards organising. We believe UNISON could do the same if only this process were done properly and that review actually took place before proposals were brought to conference. So no preconceived ideas on our part, other than that we genuinely believe we can be more ambitious if we do it well.
Steve, just while you're on, sorry, there was a question relayed to me via the chat from another Northwest, from Jane, asking whether or not the NEC members have been given a list of the winners and losers in terms of the branch resources review.
No, I mean, Dan mentioned this before. This is information that was requested on multiple occasions, and we've never received it. I think Dan probably must have asked it more times than I've ever asked any question in my life, and was consistently told, yes, we'll get it to you, yes, we'll get it to you. Unless Dan tells me otherwise, I don't think you've ever got it, did you, Dan?
No.
Okay, thanks very much. So Dan, I'll come to you to question around, if the motion is defeated, this is from James from Northwest, probably know who this is, I think. If the motion is defeated, how do we support branches who are in dire need of support now?
Okay, thanks very much. Cheers, James. I mean, motion 72 in our view should be defeated. It's the wrong motion. It's certainly nothing that will set our union on the right path for the next 5, 10, 15 years. But the key thing to understand here is that motion 72 is not offering, a jackpot. It is not offering a panacea, which it would be awful if we lost it. We have an interim position with motion 126, which is acceptable. And I think the lack of ambition in what we're being presented means that people needn't think that if they vote against this, that they're somehow letting down some struggling branches somewhere. That's not the case. And there's also a thing, I don't know how well this is known, but there's something in the branch funding formula called Section C funding. If you've never heard of it, you can look at it, because it has to be referenced in the motion 72, I'm pretty sure. But any branches that are in real dire straits can always approach the NEC through their RO for Section C funding, which is like separate funding, like emergency funding. So that I hope that answers the question. Really, yeah, well, I won't repeat it. I'll say I hope that answers the question. Cheers, Glenn.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to ask you to come on to this one, Maggie, and it's from, apologies if I've mispronunciated this, Bryony from Northern Ireland, and it says, oh, come on, please, so much work has been done on this. It's been going on for 10 years. Is it not time simply to get on and implement it? Maggie?
Thanks, Glenn. Well, yeah, the idea's been kicking about for the last 10 years, but there's only ever been in the last 2 years any work actually undertaken on taking this forward. Now, bearing in mind, for the last 15 months, we've been kind of going through a pandemic, so there was even less work being done. I'm not saying it stopped completely, there was still plenty going on, but it hasn't completed. There's far more work needs to be done to make it work. It's insufficient, it's incomplete, it's not the right solution for the union as a whole, our activists who are out there doing their jobs, or more specifically, our members. It falls far short of what we deserve or need. So I think we need to keep going and let it come to a position where we've got a robust proposal which is future-proofed that we can take forward. I hope that helps. Thanks, Glenn.
Question I'm going to give to you, James, around schools. It's from Conroy from Eastern Region, and it says, the pandemic has highlighted just how isolated some members are in their workplaces and how few workplace contacts there are in schools. Can we get more funding to work within schools to build members' confidence to participate in the union and increase active membership?
Yeah, I support our members in schools, and that's exactly the sort of activity that branches do need extra resources for, but this proposal won't deliver them. For this kind of activity, you would be bidding to a fund that isn't adequate, that doesn't have enough money in it, that doesn't have enough money to support everything that branches would want from it. I think I'm right in saying that the fund would work out at about £3,500 per branch, which is not enough.
Thanks very much, Jane. Steve, this is around the survey that you mentioned from Trudy from the Southwest. It says that the whole union took part in an enormous survey and made it very clear that funding is only a branch's third priority. More time and more support were the top two priorities. Why are you focusing on funding? Steve, you okay to come on that?
Yeah, I mean, first thing I want to say is that I was one of the biggest advocates for doing this survey, and trust me, it was a battle. in terms of actually having the opportunity to engage branches in that way. So I led the work stream that completed the survey, and I've probably spent as much time as anybody else analysing the results. And what's happening is that a distorted picture of those survey results is being presented. So yes, the top 3 priorities identified were more time, more regional support, and more branch funding. First point to make is you've got to ask yourself the question whether you see regional support or branch funding as more important. The fact is, as Glenn and Dan have pointed out, neither of them are adequately resourced in these proposals. And then the other thing is as well, it'll be presented to you as though regional support was considered so much more important than branch funding. Well, actually, as I stated before, 3 regions of the union said they preferred branch funding over regional support. I've not seen that presented anywhere in any of the presentations I've seen from the NEC. The local government service group branches who responded to the survey, they identified branch funding as a greater need than regional support. And the other thing as well, final point I'd make, is that there's a lot being made of software and platforms and the things that Jane's described. Well, there were options as well in the survey, but they came in at 4 and 5 underneath more funding. So I think the way that the survey results are being put forward are entirely disingenuous and not in line with what branches actually told us they needed, either through the survey or through the follow-up engagement work, which I was directly participating in.
Thanks, Steve. Dan, can you take the question from Liliana from the Southeast, which is, what's the impact of the current proposals on branch employed staff?
Okay, that's a good question. They don't directly impact on branch employed staff, but I suppose what you would say is that these proposals don't radically improve the funding position of branches. So if I was a member of branch employed staff, I would, I might be working in a branch which is really struggling with workloads. Maybe I'm not able to be employed on national UNISON terms and conditions because many branches don't have the money, so they offer different terms and conditions. There's nothing on offer here to actually improve the stability or the terms and conditions of branch employed staff. And what we wouldn't see is an increase, an influx of branch employed staff through this. There just simply won't be the sums available. As Glenn said in his presentation, the staff who will be employed through the regional organising fund, now called the branch organising fund, they will be employed by the national office. They won't be branch employees. So branches will only be looking to any increase they can get through the retention offer, the retention formula, to increase the number of staff, the number of organisers they have, the number of people doing things in their branch. So we're not going to see a radical shift in the numbers of branches employing staff. So I don't know, I see this as not improving the position of branch employed staff and not doing anything to reduce the chasm between nationally employed staff and regionally and branch employed staff, and there is a difference. So yes, that's how I would answer that, Liliana. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Dan. We're doing well. If you can keep your answers succinct, that'd be really helpful. Jane, I'll ask you to take this one. It's from Miriam from the Northern region. The shopping list from a national procurement service. To case web costs from big changes to the organising school to an RMS upgrade. Surely this will make a major difference.
Yes, and the national office gets the major part of our members' subs. So why is it contingent on this new funding formula? It makes no sense to me.
Okay, which takes us nicely into the next question. Steve, I'll ask you to answer this. It's from Graham from Wales. 60% of the union's income is spent on staff, 2/3 of which are based in regions. Why would you want to attack staff's terms and conditions and pay? Is it not right that this is part of a separate review? The new General Secretary has promised there will be a staff review. So what is the issue? Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've touched on this already. This is not about getting rid of anybody. This is about making sure that people employed by the union are doing what members and branches are identifying are needed within the union. And actually, I would suggest that a lot of the staff would be much happier working in organising and campaigning roles than some of the more bureaucratic roles they currently find themselves in. So yeah, a lot of them are based within regions. And we've seen, and Glenn, you talked about this, examples in the Northwest of where staff have been redirected more towards organising functions than previous functions. And to me, seem much more satisfied with doing that than what they were doing previously. So let's see more of that. But in order to do that, we need a staffing review with the involvement of staff, with the involvement of their unions, all done properly, but it needs to happen. Yes, the new General Secretary has said that she wants to see it undertaken, and that's great. But we were told 2 years ago that it was going to be undertaken before proposals on this came to conference. It didn't happen then. Hopefully it will happen now, but we shouldn't be accepting branch funding formula changes until it actually takes place. So let's just get on with it. We can get on with it. We can get on with it quickly. We can do it properly, do it right, bring back some proposals next year.
Thanks, Steve. The next question has already been answered, but I'll answer it anyway. It's Diane from Greater London, and her question was, there will be no more temporary contracts for organising staff, and branches can get extra caseworkers if they so choose. Is that not what we want? Well, I hope you've understood that branches themselves will not get permanent staff on the back of the Branch Support and Organising Fund. Categorically, they will not get permanent staff. Absolutely right and proper, and I've already referenced this, that the union will hopefully stop its employment for organisers on temporary contracts, renewable temporary contracts, and we argued hard for that in the relevant work stream. And we're happy that that's been accepted, but we need to be really clear. These proposals do not offer branches the ability to employ permanent staff. You will bid for projects. Now, whatever you think of that, you can come to make your own decisions in terms of the value of that. But we don't want people to support this on the basis that they believe it's going to bring them permanency. The solutions need to be long-term, and therefore the offer of services on permanent staff need to be long-term. And branches are not being offered the ability to use the additional funding to employ permanent staff. You will have to bid alongside your other branches and other regions for project work, for project-based work. We're nearly done, so this is great. We're going to do it on time. Steve, I'm going to come to you again. Apologies, these are all out of order. It's Ellie from the Northwest. Organising projects have made a massive difference in my region. Why would we oppose the creation of such a fund?
The dead simple one that we want it to be bigger. We want it to be better, and we want it introduced after all the resources of the union have been looked at, not just a minority of them. Definitely support that, Ellie. Let's do it properly.
Thanks, Steve. Two more, and both for you, Dan. Yeah, they are. Andy from Northern Ireland. The first one, Dan, is, I've just become joint treasurer and I'm interested in the formula as to how the percentage is worked out. Our branch gets 20%. I see the percentage quoted as 23%. I've asked for the formula breakdown, but as of yet, I've simply not received an answer.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Cheers for that. I mean, I think you might be you might be confused on a couple of bits there. It sounds like your branch doesn't get any additional entitlements if you're on a flat 20%, which is the base funding percentage branches get, and you lose additional entitlements if your reserves are too high. If you're only getting 20% basic, it sounds to me like your reserves might be high. The 23.5%, that is a reference to the overall proportion of the funding cake that that branches get. So I can't remember the precise figure, but it's around £170 million a year that the union takes in subscription income from all of its 1.3 million members. Branches have a cap that as a whole, all 829 of us can't get more than 23.5% of that funding cake. That is due to go up to 24%, but that's not about what you as an individual branch gets. I suspect, though, if you've got very high reserves, you'll still be getting your basic entitlement, because that doesn't change under the new proposals. Hope that helps.
Right, thanks. Just before you address the final question, Dan, is it possible to put the slide back up with the contact details, please?
Yeah.
And just while Dan's doing that, I was asked the term that was used about underhand tactics, special delegates conference. So I'm not suggesting this is an underhand tactic, but I've been advised that the notice, if you want to speak on any motions at special delegates conference, will go out this Friday. And it is possible it'll be on a first come, first served basis. So I generally don't know how they will manage if they have 400 speakers on the branch resources review, I don't know how they're going to manage that. So just to be aware that the notice around speakers availability, if you want to speak on a motion at Special Delegates Conference, will go to those delegates for SDC on Friday. Okay, so you've got the details. We've managed to get through all but the last question, which I'm now going to ask Dan to do. And it says, some branches will get over 40% of their members' subs back. This is absolutely incredible. Can you explain what your issue is with that, Dan?
Okay, thanks. I mean, hopefully my presentation earlier helped with that. I mean, if you meet a branch getting over 40% in retention, then do please send them my way. I'd like to meet them and shake their hand and find out a bit more about what they're doing down there at that branch. Because goodness me, they'll be facing some travails. They'll have no reserves. They'll have about 1,000 employers. Goodness me, I wouldn't want to be in that branch, and their branch secretary will deserve a pat on the back. So I just don't think we are going to see branches benefiting from the retention formula in the way proposed, which is one of the reasons we need to vote it down. It's not going to provide the funding that branches are desperate for, so that we can build our union into a fighting union, and one that will organise its members and support its members, and also not be run on the goodwill of a dwindling number of branch activists who are carrying the union. Basically, we need to get that resource where the fight is and where the work is done. So I hope that answers. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks very much indeed, Dan. And thanks very much to all those involved in putting this event together. Again, I'm not suggesting this is an underhand tactic, but for many people across the different regions in our union, the day that they're choosing to send out the request for speakers, which may be on a first come, first served basis, is for many families with children, it's the day before a half-term holiday. So you make of that what you will. So this was presented under the headings of insufficient and incomplete, and I hope that you've got some understanding of why I believe that anybody going to a Special Delegates Conference needs to give very serious consideration to how they intend to vote in support or in opposition. We are very clear, given that it's highly unlikely that the attempts we've made to change the NEC motion will change. We're very clear that if that is the case, if there's no change, that we need to oppose it, not for the sake of opposing it, but for the sake of deferring it until we get this right. So it will be put back until we've got it right. That's what we're asking for. That's what seems sensible. And that's what we would ask you to do. If you do have further questions, we'd more than welcome send them into those. And I can't believe we've nearly started and finished on time. So to the over 100 people that came to this, a big, big thank you. I know how busy you are. Please stay well, stay safe, and I hope to see some of you at various conferences over the next few weeks. Thanks very much indeed, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.